Hi, and welcome to EdPost Conversations. I am so excited for this show because I have a very special guest, Dr. Irvin Scott, who is a senior lecturer on education focused on educational leadership and the intersection of faith and education at Harvard University. But before joining Harvard, Dr. Scott served as the Deputy Director for K-12 Education at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he led the investment of $300 million in initiatives focused on transforming how teachers are recruited, developed, and rewarded. He also led a team to initiate the Elevating and Celebrating Effective Teaching and Teachers Experience, through which I had the honor and privilege of working alongside Dr. Scott for several years. And before the Gates Foundation, Dr. Scott spent over 20 years working in the trenches as a teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, and chief academic officer here in my home state of Pennsylvania and beyond. His new book, Leading with Heart and Soul, 30 Inspiring Lessons of Faith, Learning, and Leadership for Educators, will be released on April 9th, and we are here to talk about it. So welcome, Irvin. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you, Lisa. It is a joy to join you. Thank you for this opportunity. It's great to see you again. We were just talking. It's been a minute, as the students would say, since we worked together during our Gates Foundation days. But it's just really great to reconnect, and it's great to talk to you about this exciting endeavor that we're putting out in this book effort. It's a great honor. And I look forward to this time to just talk a little bit about it, as well as talk about issues related to K-12 education in particular.
Wonderful. That's perfect. Now, first, before we begin, did I miss anything in your bio? Is there anything else you want to tell us about yourself?
You missed one big thing, but it's not necessarily written in my bio. And that is the family man that I am. I am married to a wonderful woman. Will be 34 years this year, I'm pretty sure. And got three wonderful sons and three wonderful daughter-in-laws. And I'm a grandfather. And the reason why I bring it up, and so thank you so much for asking, is because that part of me has always been a deeply embedded, integrated part of the work that I do professionally. I actually think that's true for most people. And so one of the things that I try to bring out in the book is that intersection and how that sort of personal part of me runs parallel to the professional trajectory of my life. So that's a huge part of who I am.
Wonderful. And we've been watching some exciting things happening in your family the last couple of years. And is it 2 grandbabies you have now?
It is 2 grandbabies and one more due in about 2 months. All boys. I've only had 3 boys. My wife and I, Keisha and I, had 3 boys. And now I have 3. I'm working towards 3 grandsons.
Wonderful. Well, I have to share with you, I have 2 grandsons too.
Oh my goodness. Congratulations.
Yes, 2 boys. So, and I was mom to a girl, so it's a very different experience. Being Gigi to boys.
Absolutely.
Entirely different experience than a quiet little girl,
Absolutely.
But they are so much fun and so cute.
That's beautiful.
They're starting to learn and talk and move around, and they're just a joy. So it's a different kind of thing, isn't it? Being a
Oh my goodness.
To a parent.
Oh man, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's just absolutely amazing. We're loving it.
So much has changed since we worked together last, I guess. So I've pre-ordered Leading with Heart and Soul, and I can't wait to read it. But I'm a little bit out of the know right now about a lot of the things that the book is about. So why don't you take a little bit of time and tell us what's the book all about, and what do we expect to find when we get it?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with why I wrote the book, right? And so I am and have been a sort of deeply committed person of faith, right? And so, like many people are, not so much just religion, but faith and spirituality, which is has been a major part of who I am since the beginning of my life, actually, because my father was a pastor. My mother served with him for years. They continue to serve, although they're in a very different stage in life. And so this element of faith has always been a part of not only who I was personally, but who I was professionally. Um, but at the same time, I have had to, and I think to a certain extent this is good, keep that somewhat separate from my professional world because I've always led in a public school.
Right.
And so one of the things that I wanted to do after 30 plus years in education, I felt led, that's sort of a spiritual term. I felt a calling to do the work that I've done over the years, but I also felt that calling to write this book.
Mm.
And the book is more of a look back on the work that I've done. I don't call it a memoir because a memoir is just looking at my life, not necessarily distilling lessons, but just sort of talking about what I've done over the years. This is more of an opportunity to reflect on the work that I've done. I felt called to write it, and a way to sort of lift up lessons for a new generation of educators. There are 3.5 million teachers in the country, teachers that I've worked on behalf of during my Gates Foundation days. I was one of those teachers. And so they continue to do work that I think is deeply embedded in their hearts and their souls. It's hard to raise America's children, which is what
Mhm.
teachers do, which is what principals in education, leaders, superintendents do. We're basically, they're nurturing and leading and teaching America's children. It's hard to do that without heart,
Mm.
without soul. But oftentimes they don't have the opportunity to lift up what that heart and soul looks like. They just do the work with heart and soul, obviously with a lot of intellect, with a lot of skill. All of those things are tremendously important. But there are a lot of people doing those things, and they're bringing in that heart, and they're bringing in that soul, and bringing in that spirituality. And they do it in ways that don't overstep the separation of church and state. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to talk about how I did that work, distill lessons for others who are doing that work. And the lessons are, yes, about the intersection of heart and soul, but they're also about just good teaching practice or good leadership practice, or what does it mean to lead in the midst of challenges and difficulties? What does it mean to lead when your boss is like not that cool? Right? And so I've had experiences where I loved where I was working. I've had experiences where it was sort of tough. And so I
Yeah.
reflect on that because that's a reality that many educators experience. And hopefully, the title, of course, title is Leading with Heart and Soul 30 Inspiring Lessons of Faith, Learning, and Leadership. Hopefully, it is a way to inspire a new generation of educators who do the sort of priceless work of building the future of this country by building the country's children.
Mm. Yes. You talked there about the separation of church and state, and it was something that I thought about last night when I was thinking about our interview. I thought, I know you well, and I know how important your faith is to you, and it just is a part of who you are. And I'm sure that's true of a lot of educators. And at the same time, alongside this, we have those who want to keep faith and faith-based communities completely separated from a secular school, from a public school. And then there is another trajectory that want to impose their faith into the curriculum and onto the people who are in the public schools. And where we are right now, we're in a very odd place in education policy, curriculum, those type of things, because it's been so politicized. What would you say to the people who are a little skeptical about what you've said about that separation, what would you say to them about how does faith and spirituality work in the background to help us improve education for all kids, help us achieve equity and impactful lasting change, without being one group imposing their beliefs on another group who aren't necessarily down for that?
Yeah, I write about this in an article. I think it's entitled something like Faith in Public Schools, a Third Way, something like that. Because you articulated nicely the two extremes. I'll just first establish that I am a firm believer in the separation of church and state, personally. Have always been. The two extremes are spirituality, faith, nothing to do with schools. Don't want to have anything to do. Don't talk about it. Don't keep it outside of the school doors. Educators, children, so forth and so on. And then the other extreme is bring prayer back to the school. Our beliefs should be the beliefs that more kids and educators have.
Right.
I think both of those extremes they're too extreme. And the federal government, the establishment cause, the First Amendment, however you want to describe it, First Amendment talks about there should be no faith that the state imposes upon others. But at the same time, it doesn't say it's terrible to have faith or that a person can't hold a sense of beliefs around what they support, believe spiritually or from a religious standpoint. And so I argue that the way to do this is to find this third way. And one of the ways to find this third way is look for ways for faith communities to partner with education communities to improve education outcomes for children. Not to design curricula, not to say what kids should believe, not to say what educators should believe and what they should teach, but to ensure that all kids can read. We can all agree on that, whether you have a faith or whether you don't have a faith, whether you have a particular religion or whether you are an atheist. We can all, I think, agree that if a kid can't read by third grade in this country, we're setting that kid up for a lifelong trajectory of struggle, challenge, and potential poverty. No matter what your faith is, I think we can agree on that. And so one of the things that I argue is let's come together around the educational outcomes that we want to ensure that all children are achieving. And let's invite faith communities in to help us figure that out. So that's the third way, like partnership with faith communities, ecumenical, meaning all faiths or people who don't have a particular faith. Figure out how we can come together. And this is happening, by the way, across the country in some really powerful ways. That is focused on educational outcomes. It's not focused on beliefs. It's not focused on particular values that a faith espouses. It's not focused on doctrine. It's not focused on epistemological doctrine or anything like that. It's focusing on numeracy, literacy. Yes, maybe other things beyond that, like making sure that all kids are being taken care of. They have health concerns being taken care of. They're eating healthy. There are other things, Maslow's hierarchy of need, which you know very well, which some faith communities say, well, I may not want to focus on literacy and numeracy because I see so many kids are hungry. Can I focus on? Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. But what we don't want to do is come together in a divisive way because a particular faith espouses something that another faith doesn't. And meanwhile, kids are falling through the cracks and struggling where we wouldn't necessarily have to go there had we figured out how to come together around what we do believe. So that is a long way of saying more partnerships that are focused on education outcomes. That's why I'm a firm believer in this. I'm an educator yes, strong person of faith. I've been that for 30 years, all in public schools. And I've interacted with people who didn't believe the way I believe, but the way that we came together was making sure that students were achieving academically. There is one other way I think you can do this work at the intersection of faith and education. And we're working on this at Harvard and trying to figure out how to build a community nationally that enables this. And that is by bringing people who are educators, bringing educators together and giving them opportunities with one another to talk about their faith, right? Not talking about it with kids, but bringing educators together to talk about the role that their faith plays in the work that they do. We think that is pretty powerful professional development and could potentially increase opportunities for other educators to understand each other and understand different identities and perhaps even embolden them to do this really, really difficult work. A lot of people say it's a calling. A lot of people say they do it not just for the money. Well, you know, Lisa, if you're going to do this work in education, it can't be for money. It's got to be for something else. Well, let's talk about what some of those something else's are. And I believe that that is a way to tap into some rich reserves of identity that could increase the understanding of different faiths, build more tolerance for different faiths, and allow people to embrace a part of themselves that they often feel like they can't talk about when it comes to school and schooling. And I feel like when you don't talk about parts of your identity when it comes to school and schooling, then it increases misunderstandings. And I don't think that's healthy for people who are focused on educating the next generation. That was a long answer. I hope that was helpful.
That was great. It was fabulous. And I'm thinking as you're talking, where I worked, faith connections to education was not an issue. It was something that was pretty normal. As a teacher in my classroom, I taught world religions. I taught creation mythology. I taught about different cultures and different beliefs in many different ways across all 4 grade levels.
Beautiful.
Culminating like maybe senior year where we talked about, what the government says we can and can't do in a school or those type of things. So we talked about religion in a number of ways, but we also, it's not a very large town, but in that, couple mile stretch of highway that was the school district's space that I worked in, there were 19 or 20 churches.
Wow.
It was very much a faithful community, different types of churches, different types of Protestants, Catholics, Jewish, but they were all there. And one of my students actually did his senior project on the religious and spiritual culture in this tiny town because of the number of churches that were there. We had a group that was not led by, but monitored by one of the faculty, where it was called, it was kind of like a meet me at the pole thing. And they did it once every couple of weeks where kids who wanted to would go outside and pray at the flagpole before school. So it was, the intersection there isn't an odd thing for me to see because I was just embedded in that. And like you said, like we all come to the job or we all come to the school if we're kids with our beliefs and our faith intact. We don't leave those things at the door. So best to learn about one another and best to engage with one another and find ways where we do come together, like around those social determinants of health and making sure kids are fed and have health care and that they're okay, that their families have what they need so that they can learn. And that seems like a perfect spot for the faith community to come in and be a part of.
I think you're spot on. And I think, Lisa, the examples that you gave, I think those are happening all around the country,
Mhm.
where educators like yourself take it upon themselves. They understand, it may not necessarily be deeply embedded in the sort of school curriculum, but a teacher knows that I'm going to raise children, or I'm going to teach children who are going to become citizens of this country who understand one another and don't create barriers that divide us, but create opportunities for understanding and bridging. Then I've got to like build within my curriculum a way for them to be introduced to these ideas.
Mhm.
I think that's just really, really
Absolutely.
smart and great teaching. And I'm simply looking for ways to raise that up. And I feel like when it doesn't happen, then what you do is you open the door for some prominent or dominant religions to
Mhm.
just say, like, they how do I say this? So when you don't create an opportunity to understand multiple ways of thinking about faith, multiple ways of thinking about spirituality, then you what the risk is, the predominant faith or the predominant religion can come in and basically create spaces where everyone is thinking or trying to think a certain
Mhm.
way. And so I think that's dangerous. I think I see elements of that happening. And I don't think it's healthy for our country, and it's certainly not healthy for creating spaces where we understand difference in this country.
Mhm. Absolutely. Very good
But
point.
this book isn't necessarily about all of that. That's Irvin Scott's belief. What this book is about um, my experience over 30 some years working as an educator, having strong faith, having a strong commitment to great teaching and learning, having a strong commitment to leadership, um, and telling stories of how those, having a strong commitment to fatherhood and to
Mhm.
being a husband, and telling stories around how all of those things come together in a beautiful collision of learning and love and leadership and growth. And I think that is the world of education and educators throughout this country. I hope it inspires more people to actually share their story. Like yourself, Lisa.
Someday, someday. Now, your book is organized in it's to look across your 30 years um, of education and the work that you've done, but you organize it based on a series of impactful quotes. Is there any one particular quote that was really meaningful to you that you'd like to share and give us a little context?
Yeah, I mean there are a ton of them. One was this is actually a quote that I used to tell myself. And that is, you can't raise America's children if yours don't know you.
Hmm.
And basically, the lesson there is, at least for those educators who have children, who have nieces and nephews that are really close to them, but in my case, it was children. I was growing in my responsibility
Hmm.
professionally while I was simultaneously growing in my responsibility as a husband and a father. And so my children were growing. I was having children, Keisha and I, and they were growing in their ages. And I was simultaneously taking on more leadership roles as a
Hmm.
nonprofit leader, as a principal, and I was being pulled. And it wasn't easy.
No.
But I had to come to some conclusion around prioritization. And that was, so I said things like, okay, I want to coach all of my sons in basketball or at some sport before they're a certain age. Like that was a way for me to put a stake in the ground that said, I'm going to be deeply committed to my kids. I won't be able to do everything.
Right.
My wife is she's amazing. She was able to be a stay-at-home mom, which meant we were pinching pennies quite a bit. But we made that commitment to making sure that they had, especially as African American boys, they had a solid foundation academically, socially, spiritually. And that also meant me prioritizing time with them. Although at the same time, I wanted to be the best teacher and the best principal and the best educator that I could be. And so I was trying to do it all. And I think a lot of educators do that. And that's not easy. And I won't say that I always got it right, but I made a commitment to do it. And thinking back, I think I could have done a better job of taking care of myself. But in the end, I was prioritizing my job. I was prioritizing my kids. And I really don't have any regrets for that. But that's one example of a quote.
Yeah, I hear that. No, I remember you're right. You're raising a whole bunch of other people's kids alongside your own and expected to be able to split yourself between those responsibilities. And it's tough sometimes when you're expected to be one place and really need to be at another. Sometimes that prioritization comes back to bite you. But it is a struggle, and teachers are doing it every single day.
Every single day.
Doing it every day.
Principals doing it every day. District leaders every day. Superintendents doing it oftentimes while also juggling the politics of leadership, which I think have become even more intense these days. And some of them, and I can't fault them, although I hope there's a way that I can encourage them. Some of them come to the conclusion that it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I'm not, particularly at the upper levels of leadership.
Right.
I can't fault them for that, but because it's a difficult situation, particularly leading now in the politics of education.
Right. Well, that's amazing, and I do love myself a good quote. So I was really intrigued that you organized by quote. I've always been very attracted to here's this very meaningful quote, and it's a great way to organize. When you're thinking back 30 years, that's a lot of things that you could talk about. So what are the most meaningful, the most impactful lessons you learned? And it all kind of starts off with this quote, and this is how we're going to dig meaning. So I think that's brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Now, the other thing I learned the other day when I was scrolling through my TikTok, I came upon your new TikTok and a video that came up, and you were singing to me again. So,
I love singing.
I do know that. I said you are probably the only person at least in the country, that could bring 50 strangers together who are uptight and wake them up real early in the morning and make them sing to start the day. And I said, even better was months later when we were looking forward to getting up early in the morning to come and sing with you when we arrived. So I remember the first day though, looking around and saying, he wants us to do what? Here with all these people I don't know. And by the end we were there for it. We were there for the singing. Now I read a little bit about that, and I see that you haven't stopped. You're still singing at Harvard and bringing people with you on that journey. So that's fantastic. And even on TikTok, to talk a little bit about gospel music. Now, I know you spent some time as the leader of a gospel choir when you were here in Pennsylvania, and that music has been impactful for you. And you said a little bit about the importance of song and the importance of singing. I wonder if you talk a little bit about both the gospel singing and how it's important, how that became an anchor for you, And also just singing in general. Why do you do it so much? Why should there be more singing in education and
Well,
everywhere?
I think there should definitely be more of the arts. I think we could do a better job. We usually refer to it as the arts in
Mhm.
schools. I think over the years we've gotten better for a long time. And I must admit, I feel like I was a part of this, right? So I was a part of the push for, and I still am, improving educational outcomes, particularly around literacy, numeracy. I think all of those things are really important. Those are the things we test. We don't test
Mhm.
students' artistic growth. And consequently, we spend more time in schools on reading and math and increasingly science and whatnot, because that's what we test. And I think we should be cautious about that, because when we take away the arts, um, back to the title of the book, we take away what oftentimes speaks to
Mhm.
students
Right.
at a level that is both intellectual and heart and
Mhm.
soul and spirit. And we can just see that in what they are attracted to on social
Yes.
media, what human beings are attracted to. And
Yeah.
so I think artistic expression is tremendously important. It's been really important in my life. It's been important in my personal life, my professional life. You know, there was a time when, I don't say this often, but there was a time when I was reluctant to embrace my singing.
Mhm.
That was such a part of my identity. And I'm not, I think that had something to do with, um, it had something to do with my identity as an African American,
Mhm.
and my concern that people would associate my identity to music, and which some people can relegate. Well, those people of color, boy, those blacks, they can always sing. And as I was growing up, I was like, I don't want
Mhm.
people to think that about me, and so I didn't talk much about singing, and I didn't sing often. But then it was more in my leadership when I became a
Mhm.
principal, and I was out front. Of course, I did it a lot when I was a teacher, but to me, that was because I was a choir director. But
Mhm.
when I stepped outside of that role and I wasn't in a church, I wouldn't talk about singing. I wouldn't sing that. Then I became a principal and a leader in charge of people. And I began to realize how much singing was still a part of me and how much people still liked singing and liked music. And I thought, well, I do it. It's a part of me. Why not use it in some way?
Mhm.
And why not use it as a part of the faculty meeting? Just playing music as as the teachers come in. Why not use it as a part of my principalship and creating an assembly where music starts off everything? That's who I am. And then I began to embrace it more. Then when I got to the Gates Foundation, I was like, I'm going to keep doing this thing. I did it as a chief academic officer. I found ways to do it. Um, and so, yeah, it's also a part of setting me apart from other leaders, right? And
Mhm.
figuring out what innate skill set, ability, characteristic makes Irvin who he is. And when I find that, don't make excuses for it. Go embrace it, hug it, love it, lead with it.
Yes. Yes.
And I think every one of us have that, and we should be looking for it.
That is a great point. And I'll tell you that, it was, I guess, a small part of the work that we did there, but it left such an impact on all of us.
Mhm.
Um, and it was something that we'll always remember and we'll always, look back and smile about because it was just so fun and it brought the energy to the room and it was also inspiring. The song that you chose to sing with us is, talking about it's going to be a good day. We're going to, like, we
Yeah.
started off the day, like, proclaiming we're having a good day and it worked. We always did. So, yes, I agree with you. Arts are tremendously important. And I too love to sing all over the place. um, Now, I guess we have to talk about some of the stickier things before you. I guess maybe they're not so sticky, but things that people would think more critical before you've got to go. Um, I was reading a little bit about your book, and it mentioned the passage mentioned COVID-19, the pandemic, setting us in a direction where we knew we needed more innovative educational leadership. And we've been chasing this golden ring for a long time. Innovation, impactful change. Achieving all of those things, putting all the pieces together in the puzzle to make real lasting change for kids. We haven't quite gotten there yet. So I guess my question now for you is, what does innovative educational leadership look like to you?
Hmm. Wow. I think innovation, boy, let's see. Um, Innovative educational leadership, I would describe as impactful. Like, I don't think innovative educational leadership that doesn't lead to improved outcomes
Mm.
is innovative, effective leadership. Like, I think if the goal is improved outcomes, which I think it
Mhm.
is, and outcomes, we can think about outcomes in many different ways. I normally think about it as a former teacher, as a former principal, as a former district leader, as a former executive at Foundation. I think of it in terms of uh, academic outcomes, right?
Right.
So more students reading on grade level, more students doing math appropriately on grade level, more students taking rigorous courses and achieving excellence or achieving at a certain level and reading courses, um, rigorous courses. More students being sort of grounded social and emotionally in a way that they are healthy. I would include
Mm.
that as a part of educational outcomes. More students understanding who they are and their contribution to society as future voters and citizens of the United States. All of those things I see as educational outcomes. Back to your question, innovation in education leads to growth in those areas.
Mhm.
However, you have that happen, um, I think is innovation these days, right?
Mhm.
Because I am not a fan of thinking of accomplishing that in one way. Can you accomplish it in a traditional school? Um, yes, I think. Can you accomplish it in a more non-traditional school, like a charter school? Uh, yes. Can you accomplish it in a faith-based school? Yes. However you accomplish it. Is it happening in some places where the odds are against the students and the
Mhm.
educators? Yes. And I think where that is happening, the odds are against them. There's high poverty, there's high difficulties social and emotionally, there's a lot of barriers to success. There are places that are still achieving improved academic outcomes. They're not getting a ton of extra money. I think where that is happening, that's innovation. And however it's happening, we should be lifting it up and trying to figure out how it's happening. And it's happening both on a district level, potentially. It's happening on a particular school level. It's happening in individual classrooms. So that's the other thing I would say about innovation. First thing I said was it leads to improved outcomes. Second
Mhm.
thing I would say is it's happening different places at different levels, um, classroom, school, district, charter management organization, and we should learn from those examples, right? So sometimes we think of innovation as in just one of those areas. I think it's happening in many different ways. This is one of the great things I think about the Gates work that we tried to do for many years, because we were trying to lift up examples of where great things were happening at the teacher level, at the school level, at the district level. And I think that is another important thing to say about innovation. The other thing I would say about innovation is innovation. This is probably tied to the first thing I said, which was all about the fact that innovation should lead to outcomes. I think innovation is also grounded in some standard of what we should expect for all kids, all schools, all school districts. And so a person says, I'm being innovative over here, but the innovation is not pushing students towards high standards, right? I don't think that's innovation. Like you're doing something that's really innovative, it's creative, but you're not expecting much of kids. You're not expecting much of educators. That's not innovation. Innovation is when you have a high standard and you're trying to move everyone to that standard. I think that's one of the reasons why some of the work that we did during our Gates Foundation days was great work, because it was trying to raise the standard for all kids across the country. And there are people who are trying to be innovative, but they're innovating around low standards, and I don't consider that innovation.
Yeah, that was definitely a focus of the work. Achieving outcomes for all kids, raising the standards for all kids, and also celebrating the wins, which was it was so infrequently done that it made such a difference. Looking to see who's getting it right, and then trying to replicate that, or at least try to iterate something that would work in your particular district or situation.
Yeah. The last thing I will say is, I want to shout out, you said celebrating. I want to shout out the innovation that happened during COVID. I do think there was a lot of innovation. Now, the data suggests that our kids really struggled as a result of COVID. And that is very true. I want to also shout out that there has been growth since COVID. So the resources that were coming into schools and the creative responses and interventions that schools, educators, and leaders were involved in to catch kids up. There's some evidence that suggests that kids are doing much better. They're catching up. But that was an example, I think, of the country and its educators being innovative. But that doesn't erase the fact that was a devastating time for kids, and they fell behind.
Definitely. Now, we are headed into a new presidential election, and we are still grappling with the impact of the last two, particularly in education and what's been happening. When we focus right in on what's happening in education as a result of politicization or politics, we're seeing educational gag orders. We're seeing nonsensical curriculum revisions. We're seeing book bans, radical groups like Moms for Liberty, policy that's harmful to LGBTQIA plus students. There's teacher shortages, and teachers are lacking resources, and they're struggling in so many ways. Students, like you just mentioned, were struggling in many ways coming out of the pandemic, and they still are in a lot of schools. What would you say if someone asked you, how do we find our way with all of this happening in the background and another election about to ramp up, and we're battling all of these little things that are taking our energy away from focusing just on kids and good, true curriculum? How do we find our way to that equitable, well-rounded, high-quality education for all kids?
Yeah, I would say number one, you've got to get involved. You've got to vote. You've got to understand what the issues are for your community, and what the issues are for the broader community, like for children in general in this country. You can't leave it to a group of people to say what should happen for all the kids in this country. And I feel like one of the reasons why we have a bit of craziness happening is because people are allowing a small group of people to control what happens in schools and schooling, to take over school boards, to try to write curriculum, to say what can and can't be taught around history, around, in particular, African American history, around issues of diversity, around equity. There are places in this country you can't even say equity. What kind of craziness is that? This country, one of the reasons why this country is great and has been great is because we've figured out how to live and grow and thrive with difference. Difference has been a key part of who we are. And any move to try to make us all think and act a certain way, I just think it's crazy. And as a Christian, I think it's I think it's unbiblical. I don't need the government to tell me how I should believe. I think it should just allow me to believe. And any effort to step in and have the state tell us how we should believe, we should fight against. And I think that's happening even at a basic level within schools and school districts. It's trying to tell teachers how they should teach, and I'm not sure that's healthy for this country. We pay educators to learn and to become professional practitioners, and we should trust them. And so I'd say be engaged, get involved, and make sure that we continue to thrive as a country as a result of our difference, not in spite of our difference. I think we thrive because we're different, and I would push against anything that tries to make us think and believe all the same.
Now, we were talking about getting involved, and you did include nonprofits as a part of your ecosystem of communities that come together. So my last question for you is this. What can groups like Brightbeam or Education Post, what can organizations like ours do to contribute to this vision? What more can we do? We're already out there working toward it, but is there something missing? Is there something more we should be doing to be a part of this solution and a part of this change?
I talk about I wrote something about the pre-K-12 education ecosystem. If you get a chance, maybe you can publicize that, because I talk about how the ecosystem, this theory around the ecosystem. And as a part of that theory, there are nonprofits that are a part of it. And depending upon what the nonprofit works on, it might work on advocacy, it might work on programming, it might work on sort of different elements of of ways to improve the educational outcome. I think the direction around what a specific nonprofit might do is really driven by what impact they're trying to have. And so I will plant the seed for reading that article that I wrote about, the pre-K-12 education ecosystem, a new framework for a new day, I think is what it's called, out of the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard. That might be the best place to answer that question.
So what you've just done is you've just directed me to ask myself, what kind of impact do I want to have, just like you do your students?
That's exactly right. You're on top of it, Lisa.
Well, I do know that you have to go. You have a busy schedule, but I'll just open it up to you. Is there anything else you'd like us to know about your upcoming book that we haven't talked about yet?
I would just say, please share it. Get it for someone. In the book, one of the things that I do is I'm a big journaler, and I have after each chapter an opportunity for people to journal sort of personal what was triggered for them when they read that chapter, and how does their personal story sort of flow with what I wrote, because I'm hoping more people will do what I did in this book And I actually tactically created space for you to do that.
That is wonderful. Well, I'll tell you, I'm so excited. And I can't end this interview without giving you a proper shout out.
Shout out!
For such an accomplishment, and I'm excited to get the book very soon and read. Although I probably know a lot of those stories in that book already.
You probably do. You may have heard them.
But that is wonderful. So, what's next for you?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Definitely more grounding in my faith, spending time with my children, grandchildren. That's for sure. And teaching. I love teaching.
Of course. Of course. Well, thank you so much for all the work you've done and continue to do for education.
Thank you, Lisa.
And before we sign off, I will again ask you to tell everyone the title of your book and where we can find it.
Yes, it's called Leading with Heart and Soul, 30 Inspiring Lessons of Learning, of Faith, Learning, and Leadership. Leading with Heart and Soul, 30 Inspiring Lessons of Faith, Learning, and Leadership for Educators. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere where you find your books. It's available now, pre-sale, and will be released April 9th.
Thank you so much. And let's not wait so long before we catch up.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right, you bet.